Practice 16, Adam, and we got a chance to talk to offensive coordinator Sean Lewis, as well as one of the more electric players on this team, Dylan Edwards. And Sean Lewis joked everybody had to adjust their cameras after Dylan Edwards talked because there's quite a height difference between Dylan Edwards and Sean Lewis. But those two guys have an opportunity to do something special together this year. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch what Dylan Edwards does in this offense. But just your thoughts today.
Well, first off, Dylan Edwards wouldn't want to be the same height as Sean Lewis. Otherwise, he'd be a pretty big target out there. I don't think he'd be able to sneak through those holes the way that he does and has pretty much all preseason. It's a handful of things. It's like bordering on, are we a broken record? Because Dylan Edwards has brought it consistently this preseason. I think coming into preseason camp, and I don't want to speak for you, I guess I should say my own personal expectation was that he was too talented to not have a role on this offense, but when we heard Coach Flea say it's going to be two guys that are going to be the feature backs, I didn't rule out Dylan Edwards, but I thought, okay, maybe as a true freshman, he'll kind of be that next guy in line and you'd be used situationally. And then practices kept happening, and like you said, up to practice number 16, and or is it 17? I'm starting to lose track
16,
at this.
I think it's 16.
16, okay. It just got to the point where I think he's too much of a playmaker not to have him utilized as a big weapon on this offense. And so it's going to be fun to see him out there. He said his parents are going to be down there at TCU watching his first college game. And so I'd expect some fireworks out of number 3 this fall for sure.
Yeah, and it was several days in a row that Neely mentions Dylan Edwards as his player of the day. You can't have a player of the day that many times in a row and he's not going to have the ball. And Coach Prime in one of his more recent press conferences said about Dylan Edwards, we want the ball in his hands. And so he's going to return kicks. He can flex out to a slot receiver type of position. So they're going to get the ball in his hands. And when you watch these videos, like you said, you want the ball in Dylan Edwards' hands.
And Alton McCaskill, we saw in Well Off Media's coverage, ask Coach Prime, hey, when do I get to take this no-contact jersey off? And Coach Prime said, I'm not wanting you to make a commercial. I want to see a movie. And he wants to have him ready for the long haul. So it's clear they've been kind of slowly bringing him along to unleash him once they get into games. Kavosiey Smoke getting back in the mix, a guy that's played a lot of football that Dylan Edwards said is one of the guys he's really looked up to because of all his experience. And then Anthony Hankerson has just brought that lunch pill to work every day. We said it a couple weeks ago, say it again. Coach Flea has a good problem. It'll work itself out, but that is a fun group, and Colorado fans should be very excited about it.
Yeah, and I've said it many times, but I've been an Anthony Hankerson fan. I've liked his game from last year, and I've been impressed with watching the stuff that he's done this year, and he's clearly impressed them as well. He talks. Harold talks about going too deep. I don't know. There's 4 or 5, 6 guys there that you're like, wow, I'd like to get that guy the ball. And we keep bringing him up, like Charlie Offerdahl. You cannot discount Charlie Offerdahl because every time you see him as well, he's making plays that get the team fired up. And so, could you imagine if there's a lull in a game offensively, put Charlie Offerdahl in there to make a big play, how much that could fire up the team? So that running back room to me is one of the more interesting groups because I'm curious how they're actually going to use that group and how it plays out.
Looks like the Horned Frog Scouts have showed up here in Boulder. That is a position you'd love for those guys to stay healthy. I don't know if I've covered a team here at Colorado in 20 years where all the running backs have stayed healthy. So it will work itself out, and hopefully, those guys shine. But, Charlie Offerdahl is now, 5th or 6th on the depth chart.
Yeah.
A year ago, he wasn't that deep on the depth chart.
He started a game.
That shows you the progression of things in this program.
Yeah. I think the closest thing to all the running backs being healthy was Phillip Lindsay, who just you couldn't take that guy down, and he had 400 some carry. I think it was like almost 397, something like that carries one year. So he was about the closest thing, but he was one guy. Poor Phillip Lindsay. Could you imagine if Phillip Lindsay? Don't you wish if you could go back, wish for Phillip Lindsay to have backups like this to where take some of that pressure off and have 280 instead of 390? But anyway, that's another day, right? Sean Lewis, obviously he's excited. I mean, he's ready to go. He's looking forward to TCU and game planning. He said it kind of turns up a notch a little bit when there's every part of the season and off season. There's some excitement to it, but when you're starting to get into game planning, it's different.
Yeah, and I was curious what his thoughts were on this O-line in terms of are they up to speed with what he's requiring out of that group. And he said with that starting 5, the communication has gone so well that he's optimistic, it sounds like, that group is going to be able to operate fast. As Van Wells says, this offense goes as fast as we as offensive linemen go. But then he also said, until until you get into a game situation, how do you really know? And I think that's a good point. That would probably be the number one thing I'm going to be looking at with this offense, aside from the big plays, is how quickly is this offensive line in the third and fourth quarter getting back up there in how quickly can Shedeur, get the play call in and get the ball snapped?
Yeah, and speaking of Shedeur, the first few times we would talk to Coach Lewis, there was a lot of questions about Shedeur. I think at this point we all kind of know that guy's pretty good, and there wasn't a whole lot of questions about Shedeur, but it was more on the backups and do you have somebody that's ready to go? He said that he doesn't have that guy solidified yet, but he also said he's comfortable putting somebody else in there. We just don't know who that is yet.
Yeah, that competition for QB2 is ongoing, and you can push that obviously closer to the opener because the starter, the guys need to know who's going to be the leader there if it is a competition in preseason camp. But it hasn't been a competition since Shedeur Sanders stepped foot on this campus. So, again, try not to be a broken record. I think that's why we're not asking a ton of questions about Shedeur at this point. I don't even know what to expect. Ryan Staub was on campus here this spring, and he's got a skill set that I think suits him into this offense. He does get the ball out well, but gosh, it's a lot to ask a true freshman. And Gavin Cold, has that experience, but maybe is not a guy you'd look to be a starter a couple years down the road. So if it's close, the competition between those guys, maybe you go with the true freshman just to kind of get him some of that seasoning. But obviously everybody around here, everybody watching this video that's a Colorado fan hopes that that's not even something we have to debate as we go into the season.
The only way anybody at Colorado wants to see Ryan Staub or Gavin Cole or Kason Weissman or Colton Allen in a game is when the Buffs are up by 28 points late in the fourth quarter, right? They don't even want to see if they're down 28. We don't even go there, but if they're up 28, that's what they want to see. One other thing before we get out of here, there's a Buff that's no longer here. Chance Main is a guy that played here last year, thought he was done with eligibility, petitioned, got the waiver to come back, and chose to come back to Colorado and miss all spring, but he made that decision, rejoin the team in the summer, went through all the workouts, seemed to be, making a good impression on his teammates. I talked to him in the middle of the summer. He was loving it. I went back and looked. He showed up as recently as August 11th in a practice video, and all of a sudden last night Texas State announces him as a new signee. It's like, whoa, okay. I don't know about you, but I had noticed. I haven't seen Chance Main in videos recently. Then all of a sudden he's announced. That was surprising to me.
I think Chance Main is going for the most unusual path through a college football career in the history of college football at this point. If you go back to the beginning, he goes to Independence Community College, red shirts, starts playing, gets a scholarship to go out to Incarnate Word, plays there, gets hurt, hits a transfer portal, gets stuck in the transfer portal, doesn't know if he's going to play college football again, has a connection here to CU, gets to play last year, showed a good motor, and was not their problem in 2022, but also wasn't a huge player in this program either. He was more of kind of a rotational piece. And then you think it's over again for Chance Main. Then he gets the medical hardship, and then he comes back here and then disappears. I don't think he's a great fit for the scheme from what we've heard. He is up to 270 in that range. I think he's a tweener in this system. And I don't know all the intricacies of Texas State's defense. I'd imagine there's just a clear path for playing time there, especially when you look at guys like Derek McClendon that have been working more with the defensive line. A Jordan Dominic that can play with his hand in the ground. It would have been nice to have Chance Main here in case you have some injuries, to have that security in terms of numbers on the defensive line. And maybe he would have been a special teams guy as well. And who knows, maybe a situational third down guy. But as long as there's not massive injuries at that position, it's not a big deal. And you wish Chance Main the best of luck, because I do think that probably is a better fit for him. But very strange to have that happen this close to the opener, because you're not expecting that at this point.
And really, one of the drawbacks of the transfer portal, especially with those grad transfers, is that hey, if guys aren't going to be playing, they're going to leave, right? And they can leave right before the season, and so you lose a good depth piece a couple weeks before the season opener, and so that's tough. But it's hard to blame Chance Main. He does have, when I talked to him when he first committed, he has 1 year left in college football. He wants to make the most of it. It's hard to, these guys have a short shelf life of playing football, right? And so it's hard to blame him for wanting to go somewhere where he can play. But I think it hurts to use depth. They're down to 76 scholarship players on this roster. It hurts their depth, but to your point, let's hope nobody gets hurt. You don't want Shedeur Sanders to get hurt. You don't want those defensive linemen to get hurt. Those are probably the two areas that I'm most worried about as far as depth.
Yeah, and if you don't have depth issues there, then you can go through the season, and then people will be, criticize us for bringing it up as many times as we have. But you can't predict, and it's strange in college football. For some reason, the injury bug just seems to hit different positions, and it attacks them sometimes. And if you're a Colorado fan, though, those are the two areas you got to be knocking on wood and just hope for good luck there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to hope that doesn't happen, but we'll be back here later this week for more analysis.